And hello everyone, and we're live. So today we have with us Laura from Megalith Hunter. But before we start, let's say hello to everyone in the chat. Hi Charlene, hi Mew Mew, Tina Martins, hello. Lisa, Dungeon Matron, Lynn Midzi, hello. Cross from Campaign Terrain, hey man. Oh, I see you're in the chat too. And yeah, I think that's everyone right now. So, hope everyone is doing great. So, Laura, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and your channel?
Sure, thanks, Karl. So I started this channel a couple of years ago. I was doing a lot of staycations because of the situation with the pandemic, and I went to Gozo quite a lot. Now, I've always had a huge interest in ancient history, especially the Neolithic period and megaliths. So I tend to, I like all periods of history. When I go abroad, I like to look at stately homes, castles, go to all different kinds of museums. But I've always had a really specific interest in the Neolithic area because I think that anything prehistoric we still don't understand a lot about because we don't have written history from the Neolithic or before. And the fact that these enormous monuments were being built, which are very impressive, in our opinion, for Stone Age, by Stone Age standards, I thought it's such a mystery, and I really wanted to get to understand that a little bit more. And I used to read lots of books on the mystery of it all, like by Graham Hancock. I've read all of his books, and about the idea there might be a lost civilization. So I wanted to kind of research it myself. Always have wanted to, and I've always read a lot about it, but I didn't really have the time. Then when I was doing a lot of staycations, I thought, what am I going to do in Gozo? Because obviously I've been to Gozo many times and I've been to every single megalith there, and museum. So I started looking at old research on lesser known megaliths, ones that are off the beaten track. And I started going on these hikes looking for them. And I'm falling over thorns and I'm getting stung by thistles and I'm climbing over walls. And I said, gosh, this is exhausting. I'm getting sunburn. I'm tired. This hunting of megaliths is really difficult. So anyway, whenever I found something like a dolmen, I took a photograph of it and I set up an Instagram account just to record the places I went to, the GPS locations and and take photographs. And then I made this brand Megalith Hunter because I felt like I was hunting them.
Yeah,
and then
I think you mentioned in one of your videos that one of the reasons that it feels like hunting is that you're starting off with some very obscure references, like something written in the 19th century and place names have changed and stuff.
Yeah, the place names tend to change. So a field under one name many years ago won't necessarily have the same name now, or it's a sort of or they use old grid references instead of modern GPS, or they even sometimes could be really, like if you look back at some old museum reports, they might be very non-specific. So they'll just say it was by the edge of this road. The road doesn't exist anymore, and on the edge of a farmer's field, and now that's like a built-up village. So then you're looking for references to find out if they recorded that monument and then it was destroyed or moved, relocated, or it's just somewhere hidden away and you just can't access it now. And you're just trying to like figure it out all the time. So it's been quite fun. There are actually a lot of megalithic monuments in Malta, so many more than the UNESCO World Heritage Sites that you can visit or the ones that are really obvious, So I really enjoyed that. So that's how I became the Megalith Hunter. And then I started spending a lot more time properly researching, going through all the peer-reviewed papers and archaeological reports on each site, and just sort of answering all the questions I've ever had. When I've been to Tarshin and I've seen burn marks on a stone, I'm start researching like what the archaeologists say about that, and just delving into the mysteries locally. And so that's kind of how it all started. And then I started winning some I was like pitching magazines to write about it, and I was getting, magazines coming back saying that's really interesting. So then I started doing writing. Then my Instagram feed started doing really well, so I bought a proper professional camera. And then people said to me, why don't you get into YouTube, like people in the megalithic community that have YouTube channels, and start recording all your research and your ideas on there? So that's what I did. And then it just kind of grew organically into this thing where I am now officially the Megalith Hunter. And I still want to solve all the world mysteries, but I realized I was sticking too local before as well, because yes, of course it was because we couldn't travel, but I realized that you don't always have to travel to talk about a place. You can just read the books and the excavation reports from a site and still do a feature on it. So so I do try to go around. You'll find videos on my channel from lots of different places. But ultimately, I'm trying to solve the mysteries. I'm also trying to debunk a lot of the crazier theories, I would say. Like there's been Malta always is on the map as this place with the elongated skulls, which are obviously aliens. And I mean, most of that it's not even difficult to debunk. It's very straightforward. And I hate using the word debunk, but there are so many actual mysteries in Malta, and that isn't one of them. So yeah, I really wanted to I've had to do a few videos on that to really get that down and explain it to people.
Yeah, I think one of the ones that, hurts me inside the most is like every time someone brings up Atlantis, it's like...
Yeah, I mean, it's... I don't know. I've reviewed, I did some research on this and I put it on my channel. 7 reasons why Malta could be Atlantis. And this is based on, some things that people really didn't know about. It's not your ordinary things. I went quite deep on it. But still, unfortunately, when you get to the conclusion at the end, it doesn't seem that likely. Well, first of all, we don't know if it was a real place. Second of all, if it was, it wouldn't necessarily be in Malta. But what I did find interesting from doing that research is in the past, there was an architect, the one that built the Moster Dome. He really did believe it was Atlantis. And I mean, there was a lot of forgeries and hoaxes came out of that period, but he truly believed it. And I don't know exactly why the forgeries were done, because that obviously is going to discredit you more than build your case. But that is such an interesting story about Malta that people don't know about. So even I wrote an article for a magazine about it, and I've done a couple of things on my channel about it, because it adds to it. It's not just about, it's probably Atlantis because there's these temples and they're really interesting and megalithic, and the cartwrights go into the sea, so they must be from the Ice Age, and all of those normal kind of ones that you read in the literature all the time. Actually, there's a lot more interesting facts about the Atlantis story in Malta that I wanted to bring to light. So, whether you believe it or don't believe it, that episode is just so fascinating and complicated.
It is, yeah. I mean, even the fact of the forgeries, it makes for a good story.
Yeah, like just all these like things that haven't got... When people do write articles on Atlantis and Malta, it's usually very sensationalist. It's just elongated skulls and cartwrights that go into the sea, which are things that you can debunk the ideas around those quite quickly. But the other stuff, the forgeries, and the fact that there was Athanasius Kircher actually spent time in Malta, and you won't find that from Wikipedia, and was absolutely fascinated by the country. He never claimed it was Atlantis, but he was also obsessed with Atlantis. So there are these stories that are very interesting that no one tends to pick up on and put in the popular literature. So if you really want to go down that route, then fine, but I'm going to give you some more interesting facts about it.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm still with the idea that if Plato was alive to hear that people thought Atlantis was a real place, he'd be like, are you people okay? Because I'm pretty sure he never meant it as anything other than a story, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of the stories are allegorical. I mean, so it just depends, doesn't it? Not necessarily. I mean, even with anything, when you actually have ancient writers that are characterized as historians, they still added a lot of embellishments to their work.
Oh yeah, I mean that's remind me, was it Herodotus who started the whole writing down history thing? It wasn't exactly you know, is this truth or fiction? Never mind, it's a good story, throw it in there.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to tease out the facts. So a lot of it's open to interpretation. So with prehistory, when we didn't have a written language, it's quite hard to figure things out because you have no context. An archaeologist can dig something up and they still don't really have any context about it. There's no epigraphic inscriptions. You don't have any text. You don't have any illustrations from that period. But even when you look at the historic period, when we did have written language and when things started to be written down, it's still quite difficult to interpret because you just don't understand a lot of things about the complexity of those societies or the economics of those societies. So even the cuneiform tablets in Mesopotamia, quite tricky, I guess, for scholars to figure them out because they don't have context. There's lots of things to do with storage and the timings that certain guards were on duty and things. But when you don't live in that society, it's still hard to figure out what they were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the period of history I usually play in, we have accounts, we have diaries, we have receipts, we have, you know, pretty much the whole package. And if you're only looking at, if you can only see certain aspects of it, it's very difficult to piece everything together.
Yeah, for sure.
But that actually brings me to one point I wanted to discuss about today, because as I mentioned, this is about providing a view of the real world remains to help form fictional words or fictional narratives or whatever. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I find really strange is how much information there would be in a fictional world of something that happened 9,000, 10,000 years ago. Like, here's exactly what happens, these are the names of the people, and these are the things that happened. Whereas in the real world, I think going even back 1,000 years, we're on very shaky ground.
Oh yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So when would be the earliest time we can say, okay, we vaguely know, we have a good idea of what was going on in the real world?
I guess it would be the late Bronze Age, mm-hmm. when you have written records coming out of Egypt and Mesopotamia, I guess. And then at that time in the Mediterranean, central Mediterranean, like where we are, there was nothing written down at all. They still didn't have a written language. The late Bronze Age in Italy didn't have it. In fact, the first people in Italy to start writing stuff down were the Etruscans.
Okay.
And they used the Greek alphabet to do that when the Greeks were settling on the southern mainland and Sicily. So I guess that would be like 700 BCE.
Which is really not that long ago in the scale of things.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you had a lot of other artifacts, lots of art coming out and lots of pottery that survived. So yeah, it's a very different kind of complex society at that point.
Yeah, to put it into perspective, I think, if I remember correctly, the oldest structure that we know of is Göbekli Tepe at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a number of structures in Anatolia. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Göbekli Tepe is the oldest one. I think there are some other settlements in the area which are a little bit older, but ultimately we're still talking, Göbekli Tepe is 9,600 BCE. So, and yeah, around that mark.
Yeah, so again, we only have solid facts, which we can call facts, is like less than a tenth of that time frame, basically.
Exactly. And the strange thing is that you have these megalithic monuments or settlements with megalithic attributes coming up around in Anatolia. And then it takes maybe about 4,000 or 5,000 years before any other sophisticated megalithic monuments appear. And those are mostly Ireland, Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, like this side, the Atlantic seaboard, I guess. And the other mystery is what was happening in the middle. Like, why weren't any megalithic monuments built between then?
Yeah, that is an interesting question.
It is quite strange.
So do you have any theories about that?
I'm working on some, but I haven't. I always say this on lives because people always ask me what my ideas are. Listen, truly, I am trying to solve some mysteries. I want to research some things in detail and write a book with my ideas. But at the moment, because I'm not just doing the channel for educational purposes to delve deep into the history of different places, I actually really want to come up with my own ideas where there is a mystery or a gap in the archaeological record. But at the moment, I can't articulate my ideas well enough that I can present them. So you have to wait a little bit for that.
That's okay. Definitely something worth waiting for. So in the meantime, I've thrown a photo of one of the Tarshin temples on the screen. Okay.
This is a fantastic site. Really awesome.
Yeah, would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Tarshin temples, it went through many phases of reconstruction. They're actually the remnants of 4 temple structures there, dating from the Neolithic, so from more than 5,000 years ago. And what's interesting about Tarshin is it has a lot more carvings than the other temples. It has a lot of animal carvings. It has some interesting anomalies, like in one of the apses. So the temples in Malta are referred to as apsidor because they all have these semicircular rooms branching off internal corridors or courtyards. And in one of these apses, there's actually, when they removed the temple floor, which was covered in a torba flooring,
that's
they found
beaten earth, yeah?
Yeah,
okay.
Beaten earth with like bits of, it's like mixed, like an ancient kind of flooring. I mean, torba is used for different time periods in different regions, but here it specifically refers to the Neolithic temple floors. And there was like this round cistern with a plug on it. And this was under the floor. So it's like it must date to before the temple was built. And the cistern was completely empty. And the stone plug is just perfectly round, really well carved, and no one knows what it was for. Here in that picture, you can see stairs. Now, all the temple structures were one level. So the theory is that the stairs went to the roof. So the roofs were probably important in some way, or it was just for maintenance, but maybe they were also for astronomical observation. And then there's a lot of really interesting pottery at Tarshin. There's these giant vessels. Now, giant vessels doesn't mean they were used by giants, obviously, but it's thought they were for ritual group feasting. So animal sacrifice and ritual group feasting were really important to the temple people. But at Tarshin, you have these wonderful examples of giant vessels. One of them, which is in the National Museum of Archaeology, even has a handle on the side as if it was a cup that you're about to sip out of.
It's just really huge, yeah?
Giant. And it obviously cannot be moved. It's a fixed, it would have been a fixed pot, presumably.
One thing about, we call them the Tarshin temples, but I think the latest, what do you call it? The latest information is that they're not actually temples, but ritual feasting sites.
Yeah, ritual feasting or clubhouses, something like that, like a place for the community to meet. Yes, ritual feasting does imply some sort of belief system, some kind of worship, and it is still thought that the structures that you find in there are altars of some kind. But yeah, temple is used as a description, but archaeologists aren't necessarily comfortable with it from what I've read. They prefer to refer to them as meeting places or clubhouses or something, rather than just say temple, because nobody really knows what was actually taking place inside of them.
Okay, in the meantime, in the chat, let's see. Kerry is saying Laura would give Google a run for their money. Yep, she would. Lynn Mitzi says that looks like it could have a second level. So I think that's what you were talking about when you were saying that there's access to the roof.
Yeah.
Let's see. Laura's talking about the semicircular rooms called apsis. I'm not sure which point that was at. Campaign terrain, I have a brand new hot wire cutter and a bunch of XPS. I'm about to build so many megaliths. Yes, Cross, please do that.
Appreciate that.
Do that, Cross. You know you want to.
I'd love to see some pictures of some megalithic models.
Okay, the end. Maybe it was a restaurant. Yeah, to be honest, the first time I heard about it being a feasting hall and with all the fat lady statues in there, I was wondering if it was like some kind of ancient McDonald's.
Yeah, actually, when I went to Tarshin with one of my brothers, this is what he said. So there's a replica of a statue that they found there, which is one of these corpulent figurines, which you can't necessarily determine the sex, but mostly now in popular literature, they're referred to as goddesses, which I don't think also archaeologists are necessarily that comfortable with from what I've read. They would prefer to say that they are, statues of indeterminate sex, which may have had a ritual function, okay? So you have this giant statue that they found, and then they put it in the Museum of Archaeology and then put a replica on the site. And then next to that, you have this like really interesting structure, also referred to as an altar, like many of them, the structures or furniture in the temples is. And it's like a big square stone box with spirals carved into it, a portal style window carved on top, and then they found a cubby hole in it of stone, and that like a cut stone, carved stone, and you remove the stone, and then they found a flint knife and burned animal bones in it. So my brother stood there looking around at the statue and the altar, and I'm like, isn't it amazing? We don't know what rituals they were practicing here. It's just so incredible. What an interesting piece of history. And he goes, I think it was a kitchen. I think the altar was the cooker. And I think that this statue is of the chef, and they just really like their food. So they made a statue of her. And I was like, so you just ruined it for me now. Like, I can never look at them the same way again.
Yeah, but that would be hilarious, though.
Oh, it would be such a shame, wouldn't it? Like, to figure that out.
Not really, no. I mean, why not?
It's just a really glamorous restaurant.
I don't have any photos of the of that particular piece here, but this is a reconstruction of one of the screens in the Tarshin temples, and considering, I mean, even on the remaining pieces, the stonework is really refined. Even accounting for wear and tear and weathering, it's there's some really precise work in there.
Oh yes, I mean, it's incredible. The carvings are really ornate, I would say.
I think you mentioned in one of your videos, it's really weird how a culture, which is basically at a subsistence level, would invest so much energy into building something like this.
Especially since they built probably 100 of them. I mean, remnants, I think, of 60 or so have been found or referenced over the years. And on islands of this size, that implies a substantial population that needs, spiritual support, because that's a lot of monuments for that time period.
Yeah,
so you don't expect a huge population to live here, because in those days, although they did import certain things like obsidian, they wouldn't be importing food and drink the same way that we do. I mean, there's no evidence of it. There just isn't the pottery to support that. So Well, that would mean that whatever population lived here had to survive off the land. And yes, the landscape was very different then, but not so different that you would that it would be a lot easier. So the population simply couldn't be that big. So why did they need this many places of worship or to meet as a community? Why? Like, that's the strange thing. And their settlements are not the same. The settlements are mostly made of the archaeologists have found like stone foundations to huts and then mud brick walls. They think there were mud brick walls then to create the rest of the huts. So the settlements were relatively simple. So these temples, these buildings, these megalithic buildings had to have been important to them and have had a really important function in society for them to have built so many and to build them on such a megalithic scale.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to build these.
It wasn't where they were living, so that's the strange thing.
And they're not burial sites either, so
No.
yeah. Remind me, this would have been before the Bronze Age, yeah?
Yes, that's right. There was a gap between the Neolithic and the Bronze Age when the islands were thought to be empty for a few hundred years. And then a Bronze Age culture came from abroad and settled here.
Yeah. So regarding the stonework, because I know that you've been also covering cyclopean walls on your channel.
Yeah.
We don't have any examples of those here, do we?
No. I mean, you could call Gigantea cyclopean in Gozo because the walls are a little bit like that. There is some polygonal masonry, but there is nothing else quite like that. The rest, it's all single block uprights, pretty much.
Okay, let me see if I can bring up a photo of them to see if so that people at home can see what we're talking about. I'm just going to read your Facebook, by the way.
No worries. Do you need me to send anything in the chat?
I mean, if you have one ready, I can just put it up. Don't worry. Yeah, the thing I really found fascinating about those is that the amount of effort that goes into building that hive structure of stone is incredible.
Exactly. It has to have been important because it's the people power. It needs a lot of manpower to build these things, but also you would think if survival is really important or would have been really important at the time, then occasionally they might invest in something interesting, but I wouldn't expect it to be on quite this scale.
Yeah, I mean, it would suggest that it was really important for their survival somehow. I mean, even if it's a question of I don't know, keeping the group together. I have no idea.
Yeah, maybe. And also remember, they don't seem to have a defensive purpose.
Oh yeah, that's a good point to mention. So we don't know of any defensive structures dating back from the same period, yeah? Locally, at least, yeah.
No, the defense seems to have been a thing across the whole Mediterranean by the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age cultures tended to be, they have warriors, they buried their dead with swords, and they built on the top of hills with defensive walls. But other than that, you don't really come across it so much in the Neolithic. So the theory is they're very relaxed people. They lived in peace. But that's also probably our projections. We're seeing like a golden age. We like, oh, sorry, I just sent that to my brother instead. We like to look back and say it was a golden age where they knew something we didn't, which is why they created these monuments, these ritual structures. They were super spiritual, they were super peaceful. But we're probably just projecting because the facts do show that there doesn't seem to have been any battles, and there's no, I don't think there's any marks on skeletons that show that they were going to war on a regular basis or anything.
I see.
So yeah, potentially they were peace loving, but there may have still been more to that society that we don't understand now. They might not have been all so like enlightened.
I mean, at the end of the day, if it's a wooden club, we're not going to find it.
Well, exactly.
So I've got some. I've got your photos. Bringing them up now. So where is this from?
That's a latry in. Is that the one I just sent you?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's coming out really close up.
Yeah, one second.
But yeah. But that's a latry in Lazio, in Italy. Now, nearly every hilltop village in Lazio has these polygonal walls, and sometimes they are fortifications, or thought to be fortifications. They encircle the hill at the top, so it makes sense. And other times they make up substructures for roads or platforms for villas. But they've become a bit of a mystery, because they're always attributed to the Romans, but the Romans didn't really talk about them, and they always form the foundations to buildings that are much more clearly Roman. Buildings that used quadrangular brickwork. So yeah, the polygonal walls can be found in other places. They're in Bronze Age Aegean. They're the ones in Peru where you can't even fit a piece of paper between the blocks. They're super famous because it seems like a higher technology was used to build them, but there's nothing recorded from that time. So polygonal walls in general around the world are seen as quite an interesting phenomenon. And I wanted to explore the ones in Italy to see if I could figure it out. And I was actually really surprised by them. I thought I'd probably end up just saying, oh, come on, they're definitely Roman, everybody. But then when I went there and looked at them, I thought, no, this is quite strange, actually. Yeah. I didn't just go to one or two, I really went around, so...
Yeah, the thing you mentioned about Romans not mentioning them, that's, Romans are like, yep, we did this, we also did this. Leaving that out would be, it's kind of out of character for them.
And also, I mean, I'm not a history expert, this is an interest of mine, but I do only use books and peer-reviewed articles when I look into each thing. Now, almost everything I say, because I'm making a video with 10 minutes or 20 minutes, or I'm on a live for a couple of hours, I cannot give you every single debate and every single thing that every single scholar has said about it. Of course, some do think the Romans reference them, but in general, it seems that they didn't. So that's my disclaimer there.
So basically, what you have here are these polygonal blocks, and they're cut to fit each other?
Well, yeah, but they're all kind of randomly shaped. That you get the cyclopean masonry refers to where you have an irregularly shaped block that's just cut away, quarried, and then it's put at the base of the wall, and then another block is kind of cut to fit it, which obviously time consuming and quite strange. But then they're supposed to have good properties against earthquakes and things like that. Sometimes you see rough ones where they don't fit perfectly, and where there's a gap, some stones have been put in, some small stones. But a lot of the time, there's no mortar and there are no stones. So you just have these blocks that they fit together, and they've been there for who knows how long exactly. But let's say even if they were built by the Romans, a couple of thousand years. Yeah. So they're pretty good, because you see the rest of the structures kind of falling away. But these areas are really solid. So basically, they hold together by interlocking, yeah? Uh-huh. Nice. Yeah. And do you know if they're also cut that way towards the inside, in the cross-section of the wall? I'm not sure. Yeah, because what I'm thinking is, okay, you've got the interlocking on the front, which keeps them in place horizontally. You've got the weight, which will keep them in place vertically. And then you've got the thickness of the wall. So that would be interesting to know. I'm sure there's some ruined sites where you can have a look at that. The ones I visited had all got other structures built on top. So you can't like look down at a cross section of it and see what the inside of the wall looks like. No, some of them even, I went to one in this village of Veroli, and it had a medieval castle built on top. So it was just like a foundation wall.
Nice.
So you couldn't have a proper look.
Okay, let's see. I think you also sent another photo.
Yeah, I sent you Gigantia to see the temple in Gozo.
Okay, coming
Some
up.
people do refer to it as cyclopean, but I mean, I don't really see it as the same.
Could you go back over that? Like, what do you define as a cyclopean wall?
Well, it's like mismatched bricks, basically.
Correct.
Really irregularly shaped, mismatching stones that still fit perfectly together, rather than nice square blocks or giant megaliths that are just uprights right next to each other.
Okay, we've got Giganti on screen now.
So this is a view from the northwest, just coming down from the museum. I mean,
Okay.
I see it as pretty standard in Malta. You have this header stretch arrangement where one megalith has been put horizontal and then the next one is vertical, so it's facing in, and then it's horizontal and then vertical. Not horizontal, vertical. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I get you.
What do I mean? Face out and then end out, and then face out, then end out, not horizontal. So there's a lot of them like that. And you know, actually, in on the Birkirkara bypass, so when you're going past Birkirkara towards Ikleen, there's some megaliths on the side of the road that people don't even
Seriously?
notice are there. Yeah, and they're part of a temple.
Yeah,
And the reason that they know it is because they've got the header and stretch arrangement. So when you look at it from the road, it's got one that's face out, then one that's in, then one that's face out. And they did do a mini excavation on the farmer's field behind it many, many years ago. And they did find traces of other megaliths and apse.
all right.
So they know there was a temple site right there, just opposite where the scan shop is.
Which is literally in the middle of a built-up area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was funny when I was visiting Hajrat, which is the actually the image I have for the background of the stream, which is super weird because getting there, you're like walking along 2 rows of garages.
Yeah.
And a hairdresser, if I remember correctly, I'm not sure, but there was some kind of shop, and it's literally in the middle of a built-up area.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? You don't only Hajraim and Niger do you get that really atmospheric feeling because it's still quite far removed from any settlements. But with the others, they, right, smack bang in the middle of either roads or villages.
Okay, we have some questions in the chat here. Actually, I can also drop in a link if anyone wants to call in with other questions. Just going to drop it in here. Okay, but in the meantime, let's see. Mew Mew says, I read somewhere that some have a rougher surface on the side edge, on the inside edge. Laura, is that true?
What's that say again?
I said,
didn't hear.
I read somewhere that some have a rougher surface on the inside edge. Is that true?
I didn't notice, really. I didn't notice because they couldn't really get to the inside parts. No, I was just on the outside parts of all the walls because they, like I say, they tend to belong to later structures now. So you can kind of walk around the outside, or they're right against hillsides.
All right.
So you can't, I mean, you can't really see the other side.
Yeah, not without
Because
breaking them.
it's almost like they're there to reinforce the hillside rather than as an independent wall, or they're part of a later building that you don't have access to. Be interesting to see, though. You see, I really want to go and explore some more because there's so many of them. I would love to go and see. I've made a really long wish list of the ones to go to and see a bit of a broader variety. So I could see some that are maybe in a ruined state, so it might tell us something else about them.
Yeah, I mean, ruins, they're delicate, but they've got that thing to them because you can really see how something was constructed.
Exactly. It's not too bad I like exploring ruins because it teaches you a bit more about the structure.
Okay, so Dungeon Matron says, it makes me wonder if the builders took weathering in mind. Rain and wind eventually wear down mountains unless they're situated in a particular way to protect against the elements.
Yeah, they could have been extremely knowledgeable of these things and understand, the weather patterns over long periods of observation. That we don't really think that they necessarily did that, but who knows? And it obviously depends on the time period we're looking at. But even the Babylonians, they used to record weather and astronomical data over like really, really long time periods, so they could predict what was going to come next. They could predict eclipses, they could predict seasons, so weather anomalies, all sorts of things. So who knows? They could have had that data at hand and used it to build accordingly.
But if I'm not mistaken, the structures were also, locally at least, buttressed with earth from the outside?
Yeah, so that they have, usually there's like an exterior wall, which is megalithic. Then you've got your interior apses, and then there's fill in between, earth and fill, earth and stones. But then you also have examples where the megaliths stand by themselves. And they still do after many thousands of years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if they took the effort to move a huge slab of rock all that way, then they made sure that it stayed there.
I mean, like, even if you think about it, so in the Neolithic period, okay, we don't know much about if they were recording and observing things. We know they were in the later Bronze Age, but the Bronze Age people, considering they had data going back so over long periods, they must have learnt how to do that from someone. It could be that a lot of their practices were rooted in the more ancient past. But even with these megaliths, some of them, they're on the bedrock. They're not buried. They're not like stone circles in England that are buried in the soil. Right. They actually sit on the bedrock.
All right, I didn't know that.
Which is amazing, really, because you just feel like, sure, you could just boop and it'll fall. But yeah, obviously, they're huge.
I always thought that they were planted, that they had stuff piled around them and so on, but that does make them more impressive. Okay, let's see what else. So, the end, if you study the Antiquity era mechanism, you will know that it takes eons to develop building techniques. So, considering how long it took humans or whatever with the tools at their disposal. Yeah. But that's the thing, yeah, it's like you said, these wouldn't have been built in a year or two. So
no.
We've got no idea how long it took, or we don't, do we?
No, I don't think we have any information on that. I mean, the dates that the archaeologists give for them being erected are based on pottery finds and organic material in and around them. But yeah, how long the actual construction took. I mean, because anyway, with the radiocarbon dating, there's always an error margin that covers quite a number of years. So I think that you could pinpoint, they started it at this date and then 100 years later it was finished. Not like the data we have on cathedrals where you actually know all of that.
Okay, Dungeon Matron says, the seasoned older builders knew what they were doing. The old guys that lived into their 40s.
Yeah.
I know there were some burials around these sites. Do we know roughly what the life expectancy was back then, or whatever?
No, I've actually been waiting for a report to come out. So in between 2013 and 2018. That's when the most recent archaeological excavations took place, called the Fraxis Project, an international project. Lots and lots of local and international archaeologists investigated several sites again and got new data from them. And they have produced so far 2 reports. One is called Temple Landscape, and one is called Temple Landscapes, one's called Temple People. Very big, meaty documents. You know, there's a lot of really detailed information on there. But if even as a non-archaeologist, you can tease out some interesting information from it, that you don't need to have like incredible detailed information on like how radiocarbon dating works, how Bayesian analysis works and all of that. You can actually just still pull out some good stuff. So I've worked through them and it's really cool. But they've got a 3rd one coming out called, it was Temple Landscapes, Temple Places, and then the next one is Temple People. But last time I checked, it wasn't out yet. And these are ones you can download from the repository, Cambridge Repository, Apollo, it's called. So you don't have to buy the physical book. And so I'm waiting for that because that analyzes all the skeletons from the Shara stone circle hypogeum in Gozo. And they've already given a little bit, even in the museum, you can find a little bit of information on it, and you can find some articles online, like they found earliest cases of, now I've forgotten, earliest cases of certain diseases and things like that, right? But in general, from the little bit of information that's been released so far, they say that they were very healthy people for what you would expect from the Neolithic. So I can't wait for this to come out so I can really go deep into that and understand more about the skeletons that were buried there. I think the most of the skeletons date to the Tarshian phase, which is just, so the earliest phase is Gigantea, and then a few hundred years later, you have Tarshian phase.
Okay. So
we can learn a lot about the health, the age of the people that were buried there. Yeah, I really want to get into that. But these are very detailed documents, as I say, and I spend ages really like going through them and trying to pull out the main facts, let's say.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Both their general health, their diets. I know there was a lot of work on that in Tarshian, in fact, around Tarshian. But that's the thing. I mean, like you can go exploring in so many different rabbit holes. That's yeah. Unless you're realistic, okay, I'm going to focus on this thing. It's very easy to get lost.
Well, as an independent researcher, that's the great thing, is I can be interdisciplinary. I can try and tease out some broad kind of speculative theories and have some fun with it by looking into all the different research that's been done. Because I'm not in a niche academic in one area. But that said, there are some really good papers that have come out which do take an interdisciplinary approach and ask a lot of questions and put out some ideas, and that's cool. But generally, it tends to be the independent researchers that can play around with all that speculation, wild speculation.
Okay, so I think I had some more questions about standing stones and that kind of thing when we find them in isolation rather than as part of a structure.
Yeah.
So do they occur in I know there are a few in Sardinia, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think there's around 800 in Sardinia.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I believe some in the around the UK, if I'm not mistaken. But
yeah, there's a lot of them singular menhirs in the UK.
Okay, so do we have any idea like what they might mean, what they're any decorations on them, that kind of thing, or do we just know that there's a menhir and that's it?
I mean, sometimes they're decorated with like cup and ring marks. Which cup and ring marks. So like there's this thing in the Neolithic that sometimes rocks were just found with like these cup marks in them, where it's like been like a cup an impression that's circular.
Ah,
And it's like a shallow impression. They don't know what it means. And sometimes it's got a ring around it, so that's cup and ring. And lots of rocks and menhirs have these in them. In Malta, I've noticed some actually at the temples, which I didn't realize before. I can't find much information on them, or if anybody's noticed it, or if I'm imagining it. But with that, that's kind of it. In Sardinia, there are regular menhirs, which are just plain. I went to a menhir that's more than 6 meters tall, and it's got cup marks in it. And then they have these ones called statue menhirs, which are supposed to be stylized images of humans, anthropomorphic. And they're very, they're very strange. Like some of them are very detailed and others are not. Some look more like humans than others. But mostly this Neolithic menhir phenomenon, which is about where they were all built around the same time as stone rows, stone circles, and all these other different configurations of singular rock-hewn megaliths. No one really knows much about them. Stone circles, they say, okay, astronomical alignments, stone rows, alignments. Menhirs, it's difficult to say really, because they're round and they're tall. So what are they aligned with? And then people say, oh, they might be aligned with that gap in the mountain in the distance. And that was something to do with sunrise on the solstice, or they might have been wooden markers used in collaboration with them that have obviously disintegrated now. So no one's really sure about it. There's lots of theories. I've actually got a theory on that, but I can't share it till I've finished my research, because I'm really worried that I'm going to go through all this research on my theory. Well, hypothesis, going to prove it, and then something's going to come up and just throw a spanner in it, and I'm just so disappointed. I just love to be right about that one, but I have an idea. Yeah, I'm just going to be so happy if I all the patterns match.
Fingers crossed.
And yeah. So yeah, keep with me on that one. I'll definitely tell you when it makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean, they could have been simple, something as simple as boundary markers or something like that. So
they could have been boundary markers or meeting places. There's one in Yorkshire called the Rudston monolith, which is in a churchyard. I haven't been to it. When I see photos, it's incredible. Like, it's so tall. You see the church and the graveyard, and then this giant thing sticking out. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. Like that must have been quite difficult to quarry and erect. And so I always think boundary markers could have been smaller.
Yeah.
Could have been wooden, why did they make them out of rock? Because like I say, in those days, if they were pretty much concerned with survival, yes, of course, you had agricultural settlements at the time, and you had specializations in terms of what people did and their skills. Some people made the pottery, not everybody. Some people weaved, not everybody, or spun the yarn or whatever. But you're still going to need a lot of resource, physical, to build something like that. And you just can't quite imagine the society had that level of complexity and specialization and free time and free resources to do that. Now, if it was a peace-loving society, okay, maybe, because you don't need to have a warrior class that are there always on guard, and maybe they could just spend their time going, but I always think, okay, put me in the Neolithic, got my campfire, my agricultural settlements going okay, I'm growing some food, I'll do some rituals to make the rain gods come on time and all that. I just can't imagine. I go, do you know what? I'm going to go and just build some giant stone circle for the fun of it.
Yeah, just because you can.
It has to have been really important. And I mean, I do think there could have been a ritualistic element. People always laugh because the experts, when they can't explain something, say it was probably ritual. But I mean, there's a lot of research and anthropological studies into the use of magic and ritual to control your environment. It's very well documented. People have always done this to, you know, when chance is a problem, your land could get flooded or your crop could fail because of drought. When chance is a problem for your survival, you try to overcome chance through rituals and magic practices that you're convinced work. And so it could be that times were difficult, more difficult than we imagine, or had been difficult before that, let's say. Or we know there's been a lot of issues in the past, you know, with natural disasters. So let's say having that as your oral tradition, hundreds of years ago, the ancestors really suffered and they were almost decimated and by a famine. So now we do all these magic rituals and we do these megaliths because it means that the rain gods will come on time. And then coincidentally, during that period in the Neolithic, it was very fertile land. Things were not that difficult. It seems they led quite healthy lifestyles. So they would think it's working.
Yeah.
Maybe something like that, you know. Or there was a practical reason that we're not sure about. Maybe they really, I actually wonder if they did have some sort of astronomical function that was just super practical and super useful, and they had to be stone because they were monitoring things over such a long time period.
Of course, wood would warp or rot and need replacing. And
if you've learned that, like let's say they had mathematical and astronomical skills that we can't interpret, as complex as the later Babylonians did, for example, and it was there in the Neolithic. It's just that there's no written record for us to understand it. Maybe that they passed down their traditions to each generation, and they kept monitoring the skies using these monuments over just such a long period that they had to be very robust. And it was really useful to them for agriculture, for everything that they did in their lives. And we just kind of lost track of that or something. I don't know.
yeah, and one more thing about these remains. Not all remains are as impressive as the stone circles or what have you. Because you have some like the carters, for example, which I know you like to talk about in the channel.
My other obsession. I'm sure I'm getting on people's nerves now because like I am trying to keep my channel on the one side educational, on the other side bringing up things that people may not have heard about before or not heard a lot about, and really going into depth on them with peer-reviewed journals and books. So, you know, it's fact-based information. And on the other side of it, to speculate a little bit and start to bring in my own theories. And it's a good repository for all the stuff I'm doing and just keep it there. And then I can go back and kind of say, okay, this is all the information I have now on this particular site. I've shared it with the people that are in my community. Great. I've listened to all the feedback they've given me on comments and ideas that they've got or books they've sent me the titles of. And now I can sort of announce my theory. So there's all these different reasons why I keep the channel, what I'm doing with the channel. But every now and then, you know, I go a bit down the route of passion. I do go on about carrots a lot because I'm a little bit obsessed with them. And if everyone isn't, I'm so sorry about them.
Okay, but just to put everyone in the picture, the carters are these basically parallel grooves in rock, which go on for quite some way. There's a complex network of them, and we have absolutely no idea what they do. They've been called
when they were doing it,
or when they were doing it, yeah. And they're called cart rats because someone decided to. That's what they were about 100-something years ago. But we're also fairly sure that that's not what they were.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you go to Pompeii, there are some tracks down the main street, parallel tracks, which are definitely worn by a cart. And because they look a bit like that, they get called cart ruts, but they're really not the same. There's been experimental archaeology projects done on them, and they don't seem to be sledges or wheels that wore them down. Archaeologists don't think they were purposefully carved, or maybe carved, picked a little bit and then worn down further. There's no way to date them. There's no reference to them from the historic period. There's nothing. They do exist in other regions, but not with the intensity that they are in Malta. So mostly archaeologists say they're probably Bronze Age, because a Punic tomb, Punic being the next period, cuts into them. So they say, okay, they need to be before Punic, but they could be the same time as Punic. It's just a different year within it. That's the other thing, other argument. But they could be Neolithic. Now, the other thing is they don't really lead right up to the entrance to Bronze Age settlements. They don't lead right up to the entrance to the temples. There's hundreds of them. Some go up hills, some are on flat land, some are curved, some are straight, some crisscross each other. Some even have like a double rut. Some have like a lip in the inside. Some have where it looks like one was worn and then a new track was worn kind of next to it that goes over it a little bit.
All right.
It just doesn't make sense. And then even some of them are so deep, and then you'll come along and then there's like a drop. So if it was a wheel, it would have kind of fallen. And that some of them are very sharp, have very sharp turns, which wouldn't have been good for wheels or sledges. So it's a complex subject, and I have done some videos where I really go into detail on it, because people always say to me in the comments, oh, but maybe it was this or maybe it was that. I'm like, listen to the video first and look at the references at the bottom, because I've reviewed it all, and the experts still say they literally have no idea. There's no actual theory that caters to all of their varied characteristics, or the fact that there's such a huge volume in Malta and not that many elsewhere. No one knows exactly what vehicle caused them, whether they were worn or carved, what, if it was a vehicle, what it was carrying, where they were going to. And if they, I mean, the ones I saw in Sardinia tend to be related to tombs. Well, they're in the same place as tombs, but they're referred to as Roman because the Romans get blamed for everything. And then in Sicily, there's some near a quarry. I mean, or maybe they all had totally different purposes and they just coincidentally all have a 1.4 meter gauge. I don't know. So it's like one of these. Now this one, because I really want to come up with my own theory on this one too. Oh, also, you know, there's been other ideas for that they were for irrigation or carrying water, but ultimately all of the theories fall down. They can never meet the characteristics of all of them. That can meet the characteristics of the Archibia ones near Busquet Gardens, or that works okay with that, but not all of them. And it does look like they were all connected at one point. Now, because of urban development, you wouldn't, or agriculture, you won't necessarily see them. But in some of the books, it's even been mapped out that they probably ran from San Juan to Salini all the way along there. And now if you go along there, there's just patches of it.
It's kind of strange, even considering the terrain they go over. It's not like you take a cart off-roading, that's for sure.
But even if they were like Bronze Age, I mean, the Bronze Age culture that lived here, I mean, it left some interesting artifacts behind, and it built some defended villages with defended walls, reused some of the temple structures, reused Tarshin as a cemetery, a cremation cemetery. But they weren't as sophisticated as like the Bronze Age cultures of Egypt or Mesopotamia or the Aegean, like the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. So you do think, okay, to have that, say it was a transport network, how many visitors did they have? How important was that Bronze Age society that it needed to have so many people coming here and using these networks and transporting stuff? It just seems unlikely.
That's a good point.
So even if it was Bronze Age, like I can understand if it was one of the sophisticated palace cultures and they had, you know, the equivalent of Knossos here and lots of overseas dignitaries visiting. You might think that the purpose of this network was related to that in some way. But it wasn't like that in the Bronze Age in Malta, so...
Yeah, and I believe that some of them just end up off cliffs or into this area, so it's...
Yeah, a couple of them end up off cliffs. And and one ends up under the sea. But that's to do with more recent seismic activity. It's definitely not because they're from the Ice Age. You see, I always say this as well. If you're going to say that Ice Age, when Malta wasn't inhabited, and you can say, no, but really it was inhabited and it was aliens. Okay, fine. I'm going to go with it. I'm going to say there were Ice Age aliens, and it was before Malta was inhabited. They came and they built these cartwrights for some strange purpose, because that's what aliens do. They land up with their sophisticated technology and they just start cutting grooves. Let's say it was them. The problem is that there are actually, which a lot of people don't realize, there's cartwrights in St. Julian's going through the valley near the Har Hamim cave, you know, the one with the really deep water. So if they were those valleys were rivers in the last Ice Age. So point is then, like, how could it be? So I think that if you're going to say that, then you have to also be able to explain that.
Like underwater aliens or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. They were diving down there. No, so I think, no, it does seem that they are unexplained, but the fact they go into the water or off a cliff isn't that unexplainable, because this, like, where they go into the water in Berzabuja, it's still very shallow there. Mm-hmm. And they didn't go deep into the water. Originally they went just along the beach, parallel to the beach, and then up the bay the other side. So it's just when the water was a little bit lower, not 120 meters lower Ice Age style.
I see. And I guess the one that goes off a cliff, you know, cliffs collapse regularly. So
yeah, you see all the erosion. It kind of goes off and then it continues on another section. So you can just see a big chunk fell away or got eroded. And that could also be because of seismic activity, or it could just be natural erosion. But there's enough explanations for it not to be Ice Age. Now, that isn't to say that, oh, you know, the earliest radiocarbon date is 8,000 years ago, but it's all a big lie, and really Malta was inhabited before. You know, there are arguments. There are some decent arguments for it having been inhabited earlier. But going back 100,000 years is getting a bit excessive. That's what I'm saying, or whatever it is that people write to me. I'm like, wow, that's a little bit of a stretch. But yeah, there's definitely arguments for it being, for the having been some sort of culture here before, probably in the Mesolithic or something. There's an argument for it. It's very scanty. It's on scanty ground. Okay. But yeah, I'd be willing to consider that rather than the whole much older.
Okay. Let's see. Lynn Mitzi is asking, have Malta and Gozo ever been connected?
Yeah, in the Ice Age they were. I mean, Ice Age is such a generic term because obviously during the Pleistocene, which was a 2 million years geological era, where characterized by a large part of it by an Ice Age, but it did come and go. You had interglacial periods. But let's say during the last glacial maximum of the Ice Age, that Gozo and Malta were joined, and then they were bigger, and then Malta from the southeast had like a land bridge joining it up to Sicily. So the land mass itself was a lot bigger, and that's how a lot of the fauna, the Ice Age fauna, got to Malta. It came from Sicily across the land bridge. And then during interglacial periods, when the area around the Mediterranean was flooded again, the fauna became isolated here, which is then why you get dwarfism. Mm-hmm. And gigantism. Apparently these two things are, if you go to Ardalim Museum, they basically explain that it's because of isolation, long periods of isolation. So the land bridge wasn't there like throughout the whole of the Pleistocene, but you had these periods where there was a much bigger landmass.
Okay, speaking of Ardalam, basically that's a place where a lot of animal remains got, I believe, some humans too.
Yeah, there's several layers of stratigraphy in the cave. Ice Age fauna, and then early Neolithic humans remains as well.
Okay, and that was interesting because basically what you've got is water bringing in earth and whatever it picks up. So it could be a pretty how do you call it? Not messy, but you've got layers of stuff packed in as time goes over, which might not necessarily be from the same period. I believe that you had mentioned. I believe that you had mentioned the possibility of previous burials being washed up and then dumped in there.
That's more the argument for the Hypogeum.
Right.
That's one of the theories that I've read about to do with the Hypogeum, was that because there the skeletons were found in a disarticulated way, mixed in with soil and even with objects. It's thought that it was like a secondary burial site. So we originally had a ritual function. There may have been a few proper planned burials, but then at a later date, it was used more as an ossuary, and the bones were just moved there from other sites. That's the general consensus. But then there are researchers that say that doesn't make any sense. It looks like a whole pile of, and even some of the old kind of museum reports talk about it in quite a way that it just looks like a load of soil and bones just dumped there. And that's the same for the Santa Lucia Hypogeum as well, which is near to the House Afflieni Hypogeum. It's people don't really know much about that one because I think it's only been partially excavated and it's a lot smaller, and I don't think it has the intricate carvings, but it's still referred to as a Hypogeum from the Neolithic, where once again disarticulated bones and soil just kind of dumped in. So these other alternative researchers have said, listen, maybe there were skeletons buried in rock cut tombs, and then there was a flood or some sort of natural disaster or torrential downpour or whatever that washed these bones from these tombs into the Hypogeum. So that's one idea for that. Our Dalem is not the same. Our Dalem is lots of very clear stratigraphy. So it's been washed. These fauna have been washed into the cave, but over many different time periods and just built up in very clearly defined layers.
Okay, and going back to something else, I think that the end mentioned it earlier. Solar alignments. What's the kind of context that we find it in? I mean, we know that they could predict and plan to certain solar alignments or what have you. What kind of places do we find that in?
So in Malta, Amnidra, the temple Amnidra, the lower temple, is aligned with the equinoxes and the solstices.
Okay.
Hajar'im may be aligned with, I think it's the winter solstice, but no one's really sure if that's just coincidental. And I don't think there's not been much else done kind of on Malta. I mean, there are some other theories that the temples were there to track the movement of the Sirius. But you see, these things are not really backed up. They're more alternative theories, but interesting ones. There's some good stuff, but it's complex. Like I've read the books on it, but I couldn't tell you in detail right now. So, but yeah, I'm not really sure about all this equinox solstice stuff. I always think, if they were doing that, why didn't they do it for all of the temples? Why you only do it for one? And even when they say that about certain ones in England and Scotland, I don't know. I read this book about tracking Sirius, and I actually thought that does make a lot of sense. The only problem with the theory of Sirius is it gives a more ancient date for the temples.
Okay.
And the person that wrote the book thinks that that's because they are more ancient. And she says this is actually backed up by a few academics that had found this pattern before as well. So as we observe the sky, the way that the temples are aligned, it works well for tracking Sirius. So but like a few thousand years before the temples were actually built or Malta was even inhabited. But it's really an interesting one because it actually explains all the temples. It doesn't just apply to one. It makes sense for all of the temples as a whole, and allowing for ones that have been destroyed or not discovered yet. So I like that one. I like that theory a lot, but it's just difficult to back it up with anything really to do with the actual age of the temples.
So, question: why Sirius in particular?
Well, they've done the mathematical calculations for that.
Okay, so rather than okay, I get you. So basically, they did the calculations. It points that way.
Yeah.
But there's still no reason why that one in particular is just what the calculations suggest.
Yeah, it's to do with the because also a little bit to do with like practices of later cultures. So the Egyptians used to record the helical rising of Sirius because it was when the Nile flooded each year. So it was really really important. The helical rising of Sirius was really important to the Egyptians, and that coincided with I think the summer solstice. I'm not an astronomy expert, something like, I'm not an expert on anything, but you know what I mean? Like, I can't remember because I'm actually want to do a few videos on astronomy and stuff, but I haven't put it together yet. And so if you look at Amnidra, which is supposedly aligned with the solstices and the equinoxes, the idea would be that the helical rising of Sirius was also important to that particular temple. And the solstice helped to monitor it in one particular year. And then obviously, because of precession of the equinoxes, the direction of the temples would need to change a little bit to be able to keep recording that or monitoring that.
Yeah, they should just have built it on a turntable or something.
Yeah. Well, exactly. This is, I mean, because I know that later on in Egypt, there were temples that they found were like the corridors did move. They did actually change them over time because of the precession of the equinoxes. They have found that.
How did they do that? Did they knock them down and rebuild them?
Yeah, start again, basically.
Right,
it's so bad. Like, that is actually like the ancients did definitely understand the wobble of the earth and all of these complex mathematical problems.
Yeah, and it also tells you that alignment was very, very, very important, because you don't just, you don't just knock down and rebuild just because.
Exactly. And okay, I understand when your alignments coincided with the helical rising of Sirius, which coincided with the flooding of the Nile, and that was really important for agriculture. Okay, fine. But I don't know, like, we talk about it like agriculture must have been so important, like they couldn't manage without it. And I feel that we're putting a lot of pressure on that, a lot of weight to it. I don't know. I just feel it's a bit much to keep putting it always down to monitoring the seasons in the agriculture. Personally, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, again, like that. If that was the case, it'd probably be in all cases, not in all, not in just a few.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, processing, maybe different religions, sects, factions, denominations, etc. Could be possible, but then again, I'm not sure. Was this before or after we get something like what we would understand as a religion?
I mean, I think the first time we really see that coming up is the Bronze Age.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is far before that. But that's why these corpulent statues have been kind of given this reputation as goddesses, because we're just presuming that they had a religion of some kind. but it was of a matriarchal nature.
Okay.
And that might be where the later goddess cultures came from, like in Greece and stuff. But I don't know, it's still really hard to say. Like my brother said, she was probably just the chef and they thought she was really good.
You know, maybe it was a franchise or something. Okay, I just threw up a picture of two of them on the screen. Okay, this was interesting because I think you also discussed in your video about some of them not having heads, and in some cases it doesn't seem that they were broken off, it just seems that they were made that way.
Yeah, many of them, it seems, were made to have like a pegged head put in. And some of the...
Wait a second, when you say a pegged head, you mean like an action figure, you can remove the head, plug in a different one?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And some of the like original excavators of the monuments, like Temi Zammit, the incredibly famous Maltese archaeologist, suggested that maybe they were supposed to be because it was to change the heads. Maybe there was always one head for the statue, but it was supposed to wobble. Oh. And maybe that's what the peg was. Or they were interchangeable. Maybe different goddesses, different leaders, different priestesses, something like that. But it's a strange one because in Malta, they're mostly headless actually. And not broken. Like this is obviously broken, but mostly they're headless.
I've just got...
They don't just have one hole to put it in either. Sometimes they have like several like holes, and it just doesn't quite make sense what those holes are for. Okay.
No, I've just got this idea of a prehistoric bobblehead stuck in my head now.
I know. I did this video called "The Bizarre Statues of the Temple People," where I went through all these old papers, reading these theories, and I mean, I hadn't read them before. They're not in the regular kind of all-around books, you know, where it's just introduction to Maltese archaeology, whatever. These are quite detailed papers on the excavations that categorize all the different types of statue, different sizes, different types, whether they are realistic or they're abstract. Go into details on these strange holes that are found in them, whether they had red ochre decoration, the way the feet are plantiflexed, which means like pointed, which they think it looks almost like an artificial thing was done to the people if they were modeled on people. So yeah, all this stuff. And I went into it and I was like, you know, I went into it thinking, oh, I hope there's enough information I can find on the statues for this video. Oh, there was plenty. I did not know about the bobbleheads. And I thought, brilliant.
Okay, Campaign Terrain says they could also be ancient pets dispensers.
Pet dispensers?
Pets dispensers. It's those tubes with the candy in them. They usually got a funny head on them.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's probably, like you say, it was a restaurant and then they were giving those out to the children.
It's like part of the kids' meal. Kerry says, do the heads naturally wobble though?
I don't know. I don't know if anybody's actually just, because I mean, you can't touch them. You just go get a peg and see what happens to it. I don't know. I really have no idea.
Okay, and what is the left side holding? A handbag. Yeah, she does seem to have like a bag in her hand or something.
That's a mini person. That's clearly a baby.
Okay, let me zoom in because
you can see the pleated skirt and you can see the arms crossed exactly the same as the person.
Oh yeah, so it is.
And someone actually wrote to me and said, is it a cat? But if you go up close to the museum where it is, you can see it's a mini person, it's a baby.
And then you can't see the legs, but yeah, you can see the rest of the body and the crossed arms and...
Yeah, the same pleated skirts that the other figures wear. And then the person on the right is holding a cup, which you can't really see unless you're stood at the cabinet, like right up close, like looking over it.
Yeah, I don't think it's visible from this angle, but yeah, I can see the little person there.
Yeah.
Okay, it's sitting it like it's.
It's not a cat or a handbag, unless it's a baby-shaped handbag. And you can see as well on the bottom of the figurine, the red ochre. So it was red, painted red originally.
Okay, old-timey miniature painters. Yes, and these come in pretty much all kinds of sizes. Yeah, we're talking from slightly over life size to tiny.
Yeah. From figurines to medium-sized statues to the giant ones that they know were at Tarshin and Hajar'im. Hajar'im had something like this, like a twin statue.
Right.
But now there's just the pedestal and some carvings of feet, and it's very hard to see, but there's a plaque which gives information when you go and have a look. And it's like, this is a statue. And you're like, really? But yeah, none of the really big statues remain. Oh, and there was quite a large one as well at Tas Silj, but in a later period when that site was reused, because it was reused many times, it was defaced purposefully. And now it's on display at the National Museum of Archaeology, and that's like a bigger than life-size one.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the things here. I like thinking it's a croissant. It looks like a roast chicken on a plate. A crepe, yeah. Yeah, we could play this game all day.
It's a baby! Obviously.
A headless baby, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were really about this headless genre.
And regarding the style of these figurines, they're kind of what do you call it? They're kind of unique to Malta, yeah, because the ones from Germany or from Italy or whatever, different shapes.
Yeah, these ones are stylistically very specific to Malta. There are, in the Paleolithic, there were these Venus figurines which were corpulent people depicted, basically. But they still were not the same as these. These appear to have a very specific indigenous style.
If I remember correctly, most of the other ones are clearly identifiable as female.
Yeah, because they got the big breasts and they're supposedly like fertility, for fertility and stuff. Whereas here,
they're mostly just assumed to be female. Yeah?
You can't really see on the chests of. There are some more realistic ones, like the Venus of Malta, but they're not even really the same. I wouldn't say they fall into the same category as these specific ones with the wigs and the plaits. And these are a specific kind of statue where there's never any markings on the breasts or on the reproductive organs. So officially, the experts say they're of indeterminate sex, and they're also, in some sense, quite realistic because they have to have been known what, because even on the stomachs, the folds are exactly where the folds would be on an overweight person. So that is like realistic. However, the faces are always really, really flat. And the backs are always almost concave, and the feet are always really, really small. So in some sense, they're naturalistic and could be based on, they must have had some anatomical knowledge. But at the same time, in other ways, they're really abstract. So that's kind of the mystery on that. If they were based on, even if they were based on like a goddess that didn't really exist and present herself to them, was not like a physical person, they still must have known a lot about anatomy to get everything in exactly the right place, in terms of the way they represent these obese figurines. So that's, that like the detail is really there, except for the back and the face and the feet and the hands.
Okay, Kerry asks, I wonder why the big skirts, cold weather?
Who knows?
I don't think, maybe your brother is right, that's just the chef's apron.
Yeah, chef's apron.
Okay, campaign terrain says wealth and prosperity symbol, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. It could be because, I mean, if there was any kind of hierarchy in those societies, which we don't know if there was, then the richer people are normally the ones that can, have the most luxurious, relaxed lifestyle and eat the most. So could be that was then seen as like something to worship and aspire to.
Okay, Dungeon Matron says large bodies and large clothes are easier to chisel out quickly.
True.
True, especially given the local stone, but I'm fairly sure that if they wanted to depict someone's skin, they would have found a way to do it.
Yeah. This certainly makes them less fragile, I guess.
Or they're exchanging wedding presents. I give you this empty cup. Well, I give you this headless baby. Yeah, okay. I mean,
Sounds good.
We've seen worse things in Greek mythology, so yeah, I guess that counts.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that all these mythologies, they are rooted in the ancient past. They have to have been passed down from somewhere.
I'm pretty sure they didn't pop out of nowhere. It's some of them are too mental to just
Well, yeah. Unless someone just sat there getting drunk on their Greek wine and was just like,
I think some of them need something stronger than wine.
This great idea. This is one thing I really like about the history of the Greeks as well, is that when they had these symposia where they used to sit up all night debating, they used to have a symposiarch, a person that was in charge of watering down the wine based on how difficult the conversation was. And I just think I would not like that sort of symposiarch. But then I also wouldn't be invited because women weren't allowed into these. So, In fact, that's one of the things the Greeks didn't like about the Etruscans, apparently. The Etruscans allowed women to sit, drink and eat and debate with them. And the Greeks didn't like that. So I feel more Etruscan.
It's funny how that didn't carry over with the Romans.
Yeah.
But then again, I think they just copied everything from the Greeks wholesale.
Pretty much, yeah. They certainly didn't let women sit around much either. I think women didn't have much of a public profile in those days, unless they were from a very important family. Mostly it was just be seen and not heard type of situation.
Earthman Brick says something borrowed, something blue. Well, the headless baby has turned blue now. Perfect wedding present. Oh man, things are getting dark very quickly. I love this. So, what else we're going to ask about? Yes, I wanted to ask you also about the vitrified hill forts, and I believe those are kind of specific to Scotland, yeah? Scotland, Ireland, that area?
Scotland and some parts of Northern Europe.
All right.
But importantly, not England and Wales, even though England and Wales have hundreds of hill forts from the same time period. So only the ones in Scotland and Northern Europe were vitrified.
So could you just explain quickly what vitrification means in simple terms, first of all?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I can even explain it in complex terms.
Okay,
so
great.
Vitrifaction is when a stone is exposed to incredibly high temperatures over 1000 degrees Celsius for a sustained period until it kind of melts, like it turns into a kind of glass.
Okay.
And the vitrified forts in Scotland and Northern Europe, so in the Iron Age, so the Iron Age is after the Bronze Age and before, ancient Greece, Rome and all that. In Iron Age, British Isles, there were hill forts put up on hilltops all over the place. They followed the contours of the hills, and there are many different types, depending on the size, depending on how many gateways they had and all of that. Archaeologists have gone to a lot of effort to classify them. And they're in Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland. And there are many similar types across Northern Europe as well. Now, so you can imagine there's a similar sort of culture, or definitely some connections between these Iron Age cultures. that's enabling them to build these forts. Probably they were not all the same culture, but they must have influenced each other in some way. And the fact that they needed forts, okay, must have been for defense, must have been a pretty difficult time, just like the Bronze Age, where you needed to be, even if you lived as a community and say the whole of northern Scotland were all friends, they would, let's say they would all still have their forts in smaller communities that and demarcate their territory. And I guess that was just in case another hilltop fort community kind of came and tried to take yours, I guess. Because I don't think we're talking one homogenous culture across the British Isles and Northern Europe at the time. So you have all these hilltop fortifications, and the ones in Scotland, for some reason, have these signs of vitrification. And we're talking hundreds of them have these signs, almost like glass walls. Now, it's quite difficult to say. I mean, so archaeologists have lots of theories on this, on how it was done. They think that there was like a wooden trestle, essentially, against the ramparts, and it was lit on fire, and then it caused the vitrifaction of the stones behind the wood. So
basically, it's a result of intentionally cooking the wall, basically. Yeah.
If it was the result of battle, the enemy just wouldn't be able to get close enough and to keep the wood and stone lit for a long enough period to cause that sort of heat damage. And when a TV show in the 1980s commissioned an archaeological experiment into this, they only managed to vitrify 3 kilograms of stone. And that was doing it as if it was the technology of the Iron Age. They just couldn't make it happen. So it has to have been something that was long, sustained, not caused by enemies in a battle, but also, they must have really known well how to do it, because they were very good at it, because they vitrified huge amounts of these ramparts in lots of different locations. Now, the other thing is, why? Why would you do that? So if it's not as a result of battle, why would you purposefully set your own fort on fire? So some of the archaeologists think that it was because the settlements were abandoned, or because the enemies actually took them over completely but didn't want to reuse them, so just destroyed them as an act of power to show off to all the other people in the area, look, we took this over, we're the boss now, but we destroyed the actual building, which I think is silly, because, I mean, once again, the survival and, trying to sustain a community, surely it would make more sense to take over a well-defended structure that's been built.
Not necessarily, but what I want to ask is, so it's not something that's done to, I don't know, strengthen the stone or something, it's just...
Well, that's another theory. So they looked in, so I get to that. So there was this idea that it wasn't from battle unless it was just the enemy just destroying it to prove a point. Then there's the idea that they destroyed it when they abandoned it, so it couldn't be used by anyone else or for ritual purposes. Then there's a theory, and this is kind of the most popular one at the moment, that these archaeologists think they even built the forts to be burnt down.
Okay.
So that it was like a show of power and this very impressive fire on the top of a hill and something like a ritual. That's the other idea. But then once again, if you're going to do that all over Scotland, why weren't they doing it in England? Didn't they get that idea? Because you didn't have Scotland and England at the time, really. So, different tribes, lots of different splintered communities. I just don't get why it was only happening there and not there. Then the idea was that it was maybe used to reinforce the walls, but there's been a lot of work on this, and I mean, it's still debatable, but most of the reports I've read by geologists, when they've looked into it, they've said, listen, it really only sustains certain types of rock and certain sizes of rock. It only really strengthens walls composed in that very specific way. Most of the time, it will weaken the structure.
Of course, because you could also get rock exploding or breaking apart from the heat and so on, yeah.
Yeah. So they just think by and large that doesn't really make sense. So yeah, it's really strange. It's really strange. It's like, this is a mystery that my dad's a bit obsessed with. Yeah, and when I looked into it, I just think the explanation that they just built these forts for ritual purposes and then destroyed them seems a bit daft. But then again, you could say that about a lot of things.
Yeah, but I mean, building a whole fort isn't something you do. Let's just build a fort today. That's kind of weird. Yeah, but on the other hand, destroying instead of holding, I can understand, because you might just not have the men or resources to occupy two forts.
Fair enough. Yeah, true.
And if you're attacking a fort, you probably had one already.
They probably took a lot of maintenance, and you didn't want to keep soldiers there all the time, I guess. Yeah, could be. I still think that the reason is just not been, I just think that none of the explanations are adequate, personally. I think there's more to it, because you, like with anything, is like with the carrots, when you come up with an explanation for them, you have to understand why there's hundreds and more to then only a few elsewhere, but they've all got a gauge of 1.4 meters and very similar characteristics. With this, why were the ones across the rest of the British Isles like not vitrified? And they were. There was a very specific thing going on. And I mean, and considering that all Iron Age forts followed the contours of the hill and all had very similar construction techniques, you'd think that if they're all being built for the same reasons, more or less, and that would be most likely defense. But then again, sometimes because of where the gateways are, the entrances to the hill, they don't seem like they were built for defense. They seem a bit weak on that front. So
yeah, that's that also brings up the Nuraghi from Sardinia. Again, it looks like a fort, it's shaped like a fort. We have no idea what it is.
Yeah, the Nuraghi.
Yeah, so basically you've got these massive towers, which we don't know what they do, what they were for, right?
Now, I went to this really big one, Barumini. Gosh, huge. It does look like a fort, but it's been built in many different phases, so that's not how it looked originally. And originally, yeah, I've got like a book on it that shows all the different phases of construction. And you do sort of think, I mean, I'm no expert on defensive structures, but I could come up with a better idea for making that one, you know, and 7,000 of them in Sardinia. So you're saying there was, what, 7,000 villages that all hated each other? It seems a bit much. You would expect maybe one every now and then and a whole community to be kind of rally around it. It does seem a bit weird that you need 7,000 fortifications. And what I hadn't realized was that they're all made of basalt from the volcanic rock.
Oh, right.
And they really stand out in the landscape. I was in the area of the Sinis Peninsula, which is like all marshy last year. It's all marshland and stuff, and you don't see that much that many buildings. And then I just came across this Nuraghi on the side of the road, an old proto-Nuraghi, like a really small one, and it was just like this dark basalt. It really stood out. You could see it a mile off. It doesn't look like anything else. It doesn't look like any of the farmhouses built of the local stone or anything. So that made me just think maybe the actual volcanic rock and the properties of it had some significance, because there's just certain areas where a lot of the volcanic rock is quarried and brought from. I don't know.
I mean, again, it would just be a case of it's available, it does the job, use that.
Yeah, of course. But in certain areas, it's not, you can't find it very close by. Mm-hmm. So they're really wanting to build out of that rather than anything else, it seems to me.
Okay, we have some questions here from Kerry. Does vitrification strengthen? I think you answered it already.
Well, yeah, I answered that. No, it's debatable, but mostly no.
Okay, and from Miu Laura, what about the fireball theory while they're under siege? I think that you answered that as well.
So I said, maybe the stuff, the rocks were vitrified before the forts were built, and when they were quarried, it was already vitrified, right? So they went and they dug up stuff that was already glass-like, and then they used that to build the things. And maybe the reason that's specific to Scotland is because I know a comet or something hit any point in history, right? Geological history is very long, so it could have happened, and there'd been a fire and it had vitrified the rocks, and then they were used to build the forts. I thought that my dad had given me this idea, but he hadn't. I misunderstood something he said. So when I talked to him about this, he said, no, it can't be, because from looking, because he's been to visit them, he says, you can see it's like a glass, and it's been done while they're erected.
I guess it would make a difference if you're cutting the vitrified blocks first and stacking them together. They're supposed to be distinct. Whereas if you melt them later, then I don't know what it's like, but I would imagine that they would kind of melt together or stick together at least in some way.
Yeah. So he says that's a silly idea, but I don't know. That was, for me, a geological explanation made sense because of the location, the geographical factor. But apparently that's very unlikely because it seems that they were vitrified after they were built. So.
Kerry, I think historians tend to negate the power of the pissing contest. I think Kerry is right. Yeah,
of the which contest?
Of the pissing contest.
Oh, right.
The mine is bigger than yours, and
yeah, it could be.
So that's a very good point.
Yeah, so, it's hard to interpret what was going on, but yeah, totally. Power plays.
Yeah, it might be a bit extreme in some cases, but yeah, fair enough. I could see that happening. Okay, so Laura, we've been going on for almost 2 hours now, so we should probably be wrapping this up soon.
Wow, that went really fast, Karl.
It did, yeah. So, before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to tell us about, I don't know, future plans for the channel or anything you're coming up with?
Well, I mean, future plans are to keep throwing out my videos on lots of different areas of megalithic research and skipping a little bit around the time periods to see if there's anything else we can learn. Because I think that you have to address what came before and what came after to really get a good picture of it. So I'm working on that. Writing various articles, trying to arrange some more trips to some interesting sites. So yeah, a few things going on. And I mean, I'm not doing any live shows at the moment, but my plan is to start to do those as well.
Oh, nice.
I want to get some engagement, get everybody talking and just, having a laugh with it really. Because we do have some fun, but you can only, people put a lot in the comments and they send me book links and things, and it's all quite formal. And I think when you have a live chat, it's really a good way of engaging with everybody in the community that's interested in these subjects. So yeah, definitely getting to that. I've got a lot of plans, but everything needs to happen at the right time.
Okay, one last question here. Karl, please ask Laura about the fireball weapon. Okay, Laura, what is the fireball weapon?
Fireball weapon?
I think it's something. Did you see maths on fireball weapon? It made me think. I suspect it's
ancient architects for the ancient architects. I think that's what they're talking about the fireball. I mean, I think if we start saying that there's these specific weapons in the ancient past, great, but why are they only used in certain areas and not in others? Surely if you've got something that powerful, you're going to go all over the place to use your giant fireball weapon and take over every fort. I just think, I still think the fact that we're looking at one specific location is a bit tricky.
Yeah, I
for,
mean,
for vitrification.
especially when you're talking about something that can heat up rock to 1000 degrees in the Iron Age consistently.
Yeah.
It's not just a weapon. I mean, that would take some fairly advanced technology.
Yeah. But in terms of when the theories are that these sort of weapons existed, we're not talking too far back. I mean, the Iron Age, I mean, it's not that long ago. It could, it's entirely possible, I guess. But I still just want to understand the motivations and why you pick specific areas and not others, and all that, really. I don't know. And I always think as well, wouldn't there be more signs of destruction?
Yeah, good point.
Rather than just, an old fort with a glass wall. I feel like there would be more evidence of a battle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kerry, what about simply bushfires? Yeah, I don't think there's the vegetation to support a bushfire in those areas specifically.
No, these are not in forested areas. Historically, they're not in forested areas. I mean, you have forests, but they tend to be. These are no. I've actually looked at a lot of them on. There's this on Google Earth, but there's also a map that this what's it called? Historic Scotland puts there, and you can click on all the different forts and look at all the different characteristics of it from the air and the aerial view. And I don't know, there's nothing really forested around them, so.
Yeah, especially considering a fort is a defensive structure. If you have trees around you, then people can creep up on you without you seeing them, which it's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, even when there have forests, I imagine that they would pull them down when they build their castles and their forts and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll have to wrap up for today. Laura, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Karl. It was really good fun.
Probably we can do some other streams in the future. It would be nice to do that.
You'll come on mine.
All right. Okay, and thanks everyone for watching. Have a great week and see you around.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.